The scene with Jason and a little girl immediately reminded me of the monster meeting the little girl in 1931's Frankenstein. And this brought up an intriguing element. The Friday the 13th series hasn't really touched on this before. We know Mrs. Voorhees had an axe to grind, literally with the counselors, and Jason took up the murderous mantle in films after her. Yet we know very little of Jason's experience with other children. How did Jason get along with other kids? Did they ostracize him, or did they just treat him as a normal kid? When Jason stares down the little girl, would he have done her harm, or would his mind snap back to when he was a little boy among children? For a movie that plays up the comedy, this was one of the few poignant moments, if not the most, in the entire series. One gag that had me opening my eyes was a little girl reading the Jean-Paul Sartre's No Exit. I'm not sure if this was to be a throwaway gag or if it has an actual meaning. To summarize the play, 3 people are in a waiting room that turns out to be hell. These 3 people are to forever be stuck with one another in the room. It's the source of the Sartre quote, "Hell is other people." If you take this quote in the literal sense, that might be an accurate description of Jason's predicament. His version of hell is the counselors and the people he has to kill for eternity. He will never be able to rest. He will forever have to kill. What does Grindhouse mean? The term refers to a type of film programming that goes all the way back to the early 20th century. A variety of films were shown, often in continuous succession. You have double bills, triple bills, and sometimes all-night showings. A recent trend I've noticed is that there are a couple of theaters that do pay-to-get-out showings. These showings are which people go into the theater, but then if they want to leave before the screening series ends, they have to pay to get out, which is a pretty novel idea. These range from independent-produced, low-budget films to second big-run studio films. More often than not, they were exploitation films that featured a lot of sex, violence, and other content that the big studios couldn't or wouldn't touch. Tickets to these films were cheap. This would encourage patrons to attend multiple showings. 42nd Street was the mecca of the Grindhouse between the 1950s and the late 1980s. They were the urban answer to the drive-ins. One theater would show XXX pornography, while you could go next door and watch 3 kung fu hits, or go to the other theater next door and you could see a double feature screening of Texas Chainsaw Massacre with Last House on the Left. The Grindhouse essentially died with the advent of home video as well as the efforts of Mayor Rudy Giuliani to clean up New York City.